Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to create some cards for Christmas using the Handmade Holidays Kit from Spellbinders. This is a kit jam-packed with so many goodies, and you can make so many cards from this. It does come with card bases and adhesive, but the only thing that I think you would actually need is more card bases and more adhesive because there are so many goodies in here that I think you might run out. So it comes with 13 A2 cards and 13 envelopes, 12 5x7 cards and 12 envelopes, 14 sheets of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, 4 sheets of 8.5 by 11 foil paper in both silver and gold. There is a 6x6 printed paper pad with 40 sheets in it. There is a package of die cut shapes and a package of floral shapes. There are some chipboard elements or chipboard embellishments, cardstock stickers, a clear stamp set. There's some gemstones, some sequins, some puffy stickers, and for adhesive, there's some foam squares as well as adhesive tape. And like I said, the only thing I think you could use extra of aside from this kit is some more card bases and some more adhesive. So I am going to get into creating some cards with a bunch of these elements, but I want to make sure that you can really see everything that's in there. So this is all of the solid cardstock. There is a lot of different color selection, and it goes really well with the die cut and the embellishment pieces that are included in this set, as well as the printed papers in the paper pad. So there's lots of cardstock to choose from, and I love the fact that there's metallics in there as well. On some of the die cut florals as well as the die cut shapes, there is some gold foiling on that. So the gold foiled cardstock works perfectly with this. And I also love that it comes in this handy box, so you can easily take it to a crop or somewhere else in your house if you wanted, or to a friend's house, and do a lot of creating with it. For the die cut shapes and the die cut florals, as far as I could tell, each one of them had at least 2 of each piece. So it would be great to design a card and then just do a second one exactly like it, make it a little bit easier on yourself. What I did was I took some of the die cut pieces as well as some of the cardstock bases and kind of figured out what I wanted to put together and organize them in my medium craft stacks. There's also a couple of dies as well as press plates that go with this set. I have the Sleigh die, it's called Delivering Joy Sleigh, and I also have the Handmade Sentiments die. I'm going to be using that for my last card in this video, but I wanted to create a bunch of cards with some of these die cut pieces first. So this is the die cut florals, absolutely gorgeous. This coordinates really, really well. There's a winter rose press plate and coordinating layering stencil that is in this collection. I don't have that, so I won't be using that, but this coordinates beautifully with that. If you wanted to create a background for these cards using that, it would work perfectly. And I love the fact that you have this kit here, but you also have some additional things that you can use it with it if you want, but you certainly don't need to. These are the die cut shapes, and you can see how many is in this package. I'm going to be creating 11 cards total in this video. I'm going to be doing 6 of them with the die cut florals, 6 of them with the die cut, 4 of them with the die cut shapes, and then I'm going to be doing a card at the end where I use that Delivering Joy Sleigh as well as the Handmade Sentiments die set with it. But this is only a drop in the bucket for what you can create. The first part of the kit, there's a little sheet that tells you the contents of the kit. It has some ideas for some card layouts on it, as well as some scrapbook layouts, because I think a lot of these pieces could work for scrapbook layouts as well. Some pieces are a little bit too tiny, but I think you could easily do some scrapbook layouts with a bunch of them. So it does go through what is in there as well as a little bit of inspiration. And I know as well as this video here, you're going to be able to find a lot more inspiration online. So most of what I'm going to be using in this video today is in this Handmade Holidays kit. And you certainly can use just this kit to create a bunch of cards. I am, however, going to be adding a few embossing folders just for a little bit of texture behind the die cut pieces. And then I do also bring in a gold pen, a gold gel pen, as well as I start using my liquid glue, my Barely Art glue in my fine tip bottle. I'm just used to using it, and I was getting frustrated being on camera playing with the double-sided tape. It seems to stick really, really well, so that wasn't the issue. I just felt like it was taking me a long time to take the backing off of the tape, and I didn't want to waste anyone's time, so I do bring in my Barely Art glue, but you certainly don't need to. I do find it helpful for some of the die cut pieces, especially the ones that aren't rectangle or square, to use that liquid glue. Sometimes I'm going to be using some of the printed papers from the paper pad to use as my background, and this piece of cardstock here is one of those papers. It is printed paper, it's not heavy cardstock, and even the cardstock that is in the kit, it's not as heavy as Spellbinders cardstock. It's thicker than printer paper, so it's definitely not really, really thin. But because this kit already comes with card bases, and most of those pieces are going to be used on top of the card bases, you really don't need it to be super thick anyways. For my personal liking, the cardstock that comes with the kit, not the card bases are fine, is not thick enough for a card base. So for using it for different die cuts, or for using it for different elements on the front of a card, or even for embossing, it works perfectly good for that. I don't do any inking or ink blending for any of these cards, but you certainly could. You could add that to it. I tried to keep them as simple as possible and not get too complicated with them. For my cards, I'm creating all A2 cards for this particular video. I'm not using any of the 5x7 card bases, but it would be easy enough to do that. I wanted to keep it, again, very simple. So for the first one here, or for the first 6 cards, I'm using the die cut florals, and I'm taking some different pieces from, like this quote is from the die cut shapes. I put that double-sided tape on there, but on the left-hand side of that piece, you can see the end of the tape sticking out. And that's because I wanted to tuck in one of the florals behind it. And I wanted to make sure that I had it positioned properly with that die cut piece. So I put that tape on there, took a little bit of that backing off, and just had the end of it flipping out so that it was easy enough for me to grab it. Once I had that floral die cut in there, laid where I wanted it to go, I could take that backing off and tape the rest of that rectangle down. For the second one here, I'm using the Argyle Plaid 3D embossing folder. This is from one of the recent collections, and it's just a really nice plaid background. I think it could be used throughout the year. I just wanted to give a little bit of texture to this background. For this card here, I'm choosing all of the florals that just have the very simple gold foiling on it. There's no color on them. You could easily swap them out for some of the florals with some color, but I wanted to use just the ones with gold foil and do a card with just that, something very, very simple. And I think that embossed and rich looking background really enhances the look of those florals as well. I'm taking some of the puffy stickers. I'm using the word joy here, and I'm going to put it on the center of those florals. In order to make sure that they are nice and straight, I'm using a T ruler. It's just going to help with my alignment. It's also going to help me make sure that it's centered on the inside of the card. So I start with the letter O from the word joy, using the measurements on my T ruler here, make sure that's in the center of the card, and then I put the J and the Y on either side of it. Just helps with placement a little bit. Because these elements are already created, you can see how quick and easy it is for creating cards. And even the embossed backgrounds that I used, typically I will mist my cardstock before embossing them, but because this cardstock is a little bit thinner, I didn't even bother with that. I just embossed them, and they embossed beautifully. I didn't have any issues with the cardstock tearing or anything. It just worked perfectly. For my third card here, I'm using another one of the prints from the paper pad. This one is a very simple print, very similar to the last die cuts I used. It's just a white background with some gold foiling, and it's going to coordinate beautifully with the colored florals here that I'm using. You can use some of the florals that have some foiling in it, or you can use some of the florals that have no foiling to it at all. I don't think it really matters. I'm again using that liquid glue for the die cut part. That way I can put in the areas that or put the pieces underneath that I want to without having to worry about ripping any cardstock or anything. I chose one of the chipboard sentiments here, and I used my T ruler to make sure that it was nice and straight. For the next card, once again, I used an embossing folder. I used the forest green cardstock that came in the kit, and I used the evergreen 3D embossing folder just to add a little bit of texture to that background. It worked perfectly with this wreath here. In order to break up that background, I used the leftover piece of printed paper that I used in my first card. This is just the strip that was left over. I made sure that it was cut down to the same height of my card, and I'm just gluing it to the center. I didn't back it with anything. I thought about using strips of the gold foil around the outside, but because there was no foiling on that wreath piece, it didn't really fit it quite as well as I originally thought. So I'm just gluing down that wreath straight on it. I will add a sentiment to the bottom. And the one thing that I do add to add a little bit of extra texture to this is I add some stickles to the berries on the wreath. It's just going to give them a little bit of glitter and a little bit of sparkle. That sentiment that I'm using is from one of the sticker sheets, and it just places or goes on the center of that cardstock perfectly. All of the extra stickers stick down really, really well. You could also use some extra liquid glue if you were wanting to ensure that it stayed down, or if you were worried about the adhesive, but I didn't find the adhesive to be any issue at all. Once the stickle dots are down on top of the berries, I'm going to set that aside to completely dry. Because they're just dots, it's really not going to take a very long time to dry them, but I do set it aside and keep on working. For the next card, the background, I used one of the pink cardstocks that are in the kit. It coordinates beautifully with the rose color of some of the florals in the floral die cuts. I embossed that one with the holly and foliage 3D embossing folder. This is from one of the collections from last year, and I do use it quite a lot because it has a bunch of different greenery on it. Once again, I'm using the strip that's left over from the printed paper from one of my last cards. This is the print that had the white background and just the gold foiling. Again, it breaks up that embossed background a little bit, adds a little bit of extra detail to it. I glue it to the left side of the card for this one, just for something a little bit different, leaving a little bit of the pink strip showing for some extra detail. And then that strip of gold that I was going to put on the wreath card, I went and put on this one. It worked better with this one because of the foiling on that printed paper. There's also a little bit of foiling on this die cut, so it coordinates just a little bit better with this one here. You can see how it works really easy to use some of that double-sided adhesive that comes with the kit, as well as my liquid glue here. And once again, I'm going to use the 'Tis the Season puffy stickers from the Puffy Sticker Sentiments. Now, these puffy stickers, a lot of them are really quite big, so there's not a lot of room on an A2 card for some other details. I think these sentiments are perfect for a 5x7 card, or even say a scrapbook layout. I did find for an A2 card that they might be just a tiny little bit bigger, especially if you're wanting to add some of those die cut florals or the die cut shapes to it. But I love the fact that there's so much to choose from. So there's really, if you don't find something on one sheet of stickers, there's usually something on another one. So there's a lot of choice in this kit, which I absolutely love. It'd be interesting to just sit down and just make cards with the entire kit and see how many you can get of it, because I believe it's going to be a lot. And that's why I said the only extra thing that I think you would need is some adhesive and maybe some more card bases and envelopes. Even though 25 that is included in this kit, so the 13 A2 and the 12 5x7 is a lot of card bases, I think you can do way more than just those. So for the next card, I'm once again using that same holly and foliage 3D embossing folder, this time with the forest green cardstock. I took another strip of printed paper. This one I hadn't used before, but I just figured it broke up that background a little bit better and worked well with the floral die cut that I'm using for this one. So I'm taking a piece of the burgundy cardstock, or the darker red cardstock here, just cutting a little strip to put on the top of that printed paper. It's the same width as my printed paper or my green cardstock here. Again, it just trims it really, really nicely. You could use a piece of cardstock behind it and have it matted that way, but by using just little strips like this, you can make your cardstock go just a little bit further and it doesn't waste anything. You don't have anything covered in any way, shape, or form. So I'm going to put this piece right on top of that border there. And here I'm going to use some glossy accents on those berries just to give them a little bit of extra shine and dimension. Glossy accents and stickles are kind of a staple in my craft room, so it's nothing that it's a supply that I think a lot of people have and wouldn't necessarily need to go out and buy in addition to this. So it's a great way to just add a little bit of extra texture and dimension with a supply you likely already have. Last step here is just to add a sentiment to the bottom, and we have another completed card. You can see how quickly these are coming together. Next, we're going to do the 4 with the shapes from the die cut shapes kit. Again, these craft stacks come in so handy. So it's great to be able to pick and choose different pieces, layer them together, and then store them in those craft stacks, and then have a crafting session with all of your pieces here. For this particular card here, I used the Starshine background die. This again is from one of the previous collections from Spellbinders from this year. I think it's the Home for the Holidays collection. I'm second guessing myself here. It's just a piercing plate, and it just adds texture to the background. So behind that, I am putting one of the printed papers from the 6x6 paper pad that's included in the kit, but this just added a little bit of extra texture to that background by just having that pierced texture there. So I used my double-sided tape from the kit on this background here, and then I'm centering that. So we're just seeing just a tiny little bit of that printed paper behind here. I'm also using that same printed paper behind one of the die cuts from the die cut shapes package, and I'm using a bunch of different die cut shapes from that package as well to create the rest of this card. These ones are all kind of Santa-ish themed. So there's an image there, and then a ticket that has 25 on it, and plus a few little gift die cuts here. These are all really easy to layer together, place together, and I love that they coordinate so well because all of the different pieces in this kit are all from the same color palette. It's very easy to find either sentiments or other die cuts that coordinate really well with it. And even in that die cut shaped or the die cut shape package, there are a ton of extra sentiments on there of all different sizes. So there's a lot of choice in sentiments that you can choose. This Happy Holidays was from that as well. For this piece here, I'm using that same A2 card base. For my background, I used the burgundy cardstock and then used the Ornament embossing folder. The die cuts that I'm using on top of here are Ornament, so that embossing folder worked perfectly with it. I often will put an acrylic block on top of my pieces while they're drying. This just helps everything to have good contact, frees up my hands to work on other things, and I will often be able to just lay things on top of that acrylic block to make sure that I like the layout that I'm thinking of in my head. In order to have little strings for these ornaments to hang from, I'm just using a gold gel pen. You could also use gold floss or gold thread if you want, but I find the gel pen is so much easier. And I use it with a T-ruler in order to make sure that they're hanging down nice and straight. The gel pen works even on an embossed background, and I'll often make those lines just a little bit longer than they need to, so then if I decide to adjust my die cut a little bit up or a little bit down, I have that flexibility. After gluing that first set down, I'm going to use some of the rhinestones that come in the kit, and I'm going to create some ornaments with those as well. And then I'll go back and add a few more die cuts from that die cut shape package just to fill in the top. I found with just the 3 ornaments there, it looked a little bit sparse, especially because those ornaments are kind of hanging down halfway down the card. I wanted to fill in a little bit more of the top area. So the rhinestones are going to do part of that. It's also going to add just a little bit of extra sparkle and a little bit of extra dimension. These rhinestones are a little bit bigger than the Spellbinders gemstone packages, the essential gemstone package. So they're going to work well for adding these little ornaments or looking like ornaments on here. So I'm just putting them in between the other ornaments as well, and I'm making sure that they're not hanging at the same level. I always make sure that they're hanging at different levels. Now, these gems are light pink. They work well with the color palette from the rest of the stuff. If you wanted to, you could use Copic markers or permanent markers to custom color them if you wanted them to be a different color. The color tone of them is already light enough, so you're going to be able to see other colors that are colored on top of that. What I would suggest is doing that coloring while it's on the backing sheet that it comes with, taking them off once they're dried and putting them onto your card. And just keep in mind that while there is a tiny little bit of a pink tone, you're likely going to see most of the color that you're putting on there, as long as it's a dark color. So in the die cut shapes package, there are these die cut bows that I figured would be perfect on top of these gemstone ornaments. And there's also the die cut stars, what I thought looked great for ornaments as well. So I'm gluing those towards the top just to fill in that area a little bit. And then I'll put the bows on top of the gemstones. Now, when I'm putting the bows on top of the gemstones, I am turning them or creasing them with my fingers and just gluing down the knot part of that bow. I don't want everything glued down flat. I wanted to give the card a little bit of extra dimension, and it really only needs to be glued down in that center. So you'll see when I'm gluing them down, I'm just putting glue in that center, and it gives some extra dimension to that card. Now, if you don't necessarily like those stars on there, there are duplicates of those ornaments, so you could do more of the same ornaments. I wanted them to all have a little bit of a different look to them, so I chose to use those die cut stars instead. For my next card here, I have a piece of forest cardstock for my mat and a piece of the printed paper from the cardstock pack, or the printed paper pack. My printed paper there was cut to 4 inches by 5 1/4, and the green piece was cut to 4 1/8 inch by 5 3/8 inch. So I'm gluing a bunch of the different die cuts on this particular piece and decided to bring out the foam adhesive from the kit. So I'm going to use that on a few of the different houses that I'm using on this card, just to give it a little bit of extra dimension. So some of the pieces are going to be glued down flat. The trees are all glued down flat, and that first house is glued down flat. And then the other 2 houses are going to have some foam adhesive. Now, I went a little bit overboard with that foam adhesive, but because these die cut shapes are a little bit thinner, I wanted to make sure that it definitely had enough support underneath it. And I didn't want to it to bow down in the center, or to get a little bit of a dip in the center of it. So I used some extra foam adhesive there. I did lift it up to make sure to put in that second tree, because I had forgotten that. And for the next one, I made sure to glue that down first before adding the foam dots to the back of the house. And once again, for this house, I'm definitely going overboard with it as well, just to make sure that it has enough support behind it. These foam dots are really easy to use. They come right off the sheet, and the backing is really easy to take off of them. Now, there isn't a ton of foam dots in the kit, but there is a lot of outside pieces to the foam dots, so you could easily cut those pieces up to use them as foam dots as well. Then I chose one of the sentiments from the die cut shape set, and there's also a few snowflakes, so I added that to the sky as well. So for this particular card, I did end up using a lot of the die cut shapes from the kit, but you can easily use less if you wanted a little bit less, or make the die cuts go a little bit farther. I finished off those snowflakes with some of the smaller gems from that kit, just for a little bit of extra sparkle. And now we're on to this next card. One of the prints in the book, or in the printed paper pad, has a peach background with some really light dots on it that I thought kind of looked a little bit like snow. So I just glued that one onto the background, and then I got a piece of white cardstock to use as snow beneath the sleigh and the reindeer. I had a straight edge on there, and when I put it on there, I just didn't like it. It was too rigid, so I just used my scissors to cut it down, and then cut it shorter to match the same size as that printed background piece. Originally, I thought to put it a little bit higher so that you could see it was a separate piece, but it looked a little bit off, so I lifted it back up and put it down. Even with the bottom of that printed paper, it looked much better. That's the nice thing about using liquid glue, is you have that little bit of forgiveness. You can easily lift something off if you don't like it right away. Then I'm using that same Barely Art glue to glue down the sleigh as well as the reindeer. For this one, I chose a few different sentiments when I was picking out different pieces, and I wasn't sure exactly which one I wanted to use on the card and where I wanted to use it. I end up using this little ticket on the inside of the card. It just suited the theme of the card, so you don't necessarily have to stick with everything on the front of the card itself. Some of the pieces that I figured didn't really go, I ended up just putting to the side. They will be saved for a future card. Then I finally figured out where I was going to put that sentiment on the front, and I really could have probably just left it on the inside of the card and left the rest of the card plain on the front if I wanted to. I ended up adding a little bit of the foam dots to it and then putting it in the lower left-hand side of the card front. I was originally going to put some of these sequins on the front of the card, but in the end, none of the colors tied into the color of the sequins, so I opted not to. I did choose to grab the stamp set because I haven't used the stamp set yet. So I'm going to use it to do a sentiment on the inside of the card. And then there's a couple little snowflake sentiments, and I'm going to put that on the front of the card as well. They're going to be very, very subtle. I'm using a gold brilliance ink pad. It ties in with the foil on the die cuts, but it also is beautiful for Christmas cards. So I'm going to be stamping that sentiment on the inside with that Brilliance Gold pad, and then I'm going to be stamping the snowflakes on the outside or on the front of the card amongst that printed paper background. They're going to be very, very subtle. You're not going to be able to see a whole lot of them, but when you see it in real life, you can see the shimmer of the gold from the snowflakes, and it just ties it in really nicely. There are two different snowflakes there, so I'm doing a little bit of each one. And you can see how on screen you really don't see a whole lot of them. You can kind of see them, but not really. But it's just a nice, subtle addition to the card. The one thing I did but didn't mention is I used a white eraser on the stamping surface of those stamps to take off any manufacturing residue from them. It's something that I do with all of my stamps, and I know that if I've used one stamp from a set, I've done it to the whole set. For my last card here, this is where I'm using that Delivering Joy Sleigh die cut, as well as the Handmade Sentiments dies as well. I have a bunch of the die cutting that I did off screen. So I have a bunch of different gifts die cut out of different printed papers, as well as solid cardstocks. And I'm just assembling the different die cuts before adding them to the front of the card. So there's a poinsettia in this die set. I cut that twice and then glued them together. I often like to curl poinsettia or flower petals with my fingers. I will do that right before I put it onto my card base. And then there's a cluster of holly berries. I put a couple dots of the liquid glue down on there, and then used a jewel picker to pick up those tiny little dots and add them to that cluster and set that aside to dry. The sleigh comes in several different pieces. There's the runners at the bottom. There is a solid die for the sleigh, as well as an insert that has these beautiful little cutouts in it. So the front part with the cutout I did in the dark burgundy, and then the lighter part with the solid cutout I did in the red, so that you can see that through there. There's a little bit of a different color tone. And then the ridge or the top part of the sleigh, I did that in the gold as well. Once again, gluing everything together with the Barely Art glue, it works absolutely perfect. For the handmade sentiments, when you put it through the die cut, there are different sentiments to choose from. I chose the Delivering Joy one because it worked perfectly with the theme of this card. I did one of the outline in the forest green color solid, and then I did one with white cardstock where I had this sentiment inlaid into that background, and it just pushes the letters out, so it kind of cuts them out. So when I layer the white on top of that forest green, the Delivering Joy sentiment is going to be in that forest green color. So now that I have all of my die cuts ready to go, I can start assembling this card. So one of the printed papers from that cardstock pack has a kind of a sagey minty green background with tiny little snowflakes on it. So we're using that for the background here. I did another strip with snow, same as my last card. Sometimes I like to outline these with a little bit of stickles for some sparkle. I ended up not doing that here, but if you wanted to add a little bit of extra sparkle to the top of your snow, some stickles would work perfectly, and it's nice and neat because the glitter is encased in the glue. I have a bunch of different gifts here that I have all die cut and assembled ready to go that I'm going to layer on top to go in the sleigh. This first one is the same color as my background, but I did that first on purpose so I can put some gifts around it, and you're not going to be able to, or it's going to be able to be seen aside from that background. My sleigh is glued down with that liquid glue, but it's not pressed down, so I can easily lift it up to tuck things in behind it. I have a bunch of different colors that I used for these gifts. Some of the pieces were cardstock scraps from previous cards. I used some solid cardstock for the little ribbon pieces on the gifts. Some of it is in that gold foil cardstock. So as a group together, they all coordinate beautifully. In this die set, there are 3 different gift sizes, and when you do die cut them, it indents the area where the ribbon is supposed to go, and then there's one die that does the ribbon for all 3 gifts. Now, the cool thing with that die that does the ribbon is you die cut them out of whatever cardstock you want. You can glue them onto the front of the gifts and then just cut the excess off, because some of the pieces are a little bit bigger than they need to be. So it's neat to have one die that does the ribbon for all of the gifts. And then there is an extra bow tie ribbon as well. For the greenery, I used the same forest green that I've been using throughout the video. Some of the die cut pieces are the same cardstock that is used, or the same printed paper that is used for the background, but I am making sure to put that on top of other pieces so that you can definitely see that. I love this greenery and floral piece because it just adds some extra texture to the card. I often, when I'm using greeneries and florals, like to shape them with my fingers. These holly here, I kind of make into a little bit of an S curve and then just glue down the bottom part. You can glue more than that down if you want, but I like it when the little pieces kind of flip up or hold up. It just gives them a little bit more movement and a little bit more texture. For the holly berries, I'm just going to put a little dot of glue where I want them to go, and then I will place them down. Now I am placing some that are in clusters, and then I'm just putting some dots of glue and just gluing down a few single berries. Because this die cut cuts a few of extra of those berries, I didn't want them to go to waste. Also just gluing down that sentiment, and because all of these die cuts are already assembled together, it makes it really easy for adding them to the front of the cards and finishing my card off really quickly and easily. To finish off the poinsettia, I'm just using a few dots of platinum stickles. It's going to coordinate beautifully with any of the gold foiling that I already have in the card. And you can see here that we have a card with a ton of texture and dimension, as well as all of the other cards made from the kit. And there's still so much left of this kit. Like I said, it'd be interesting to know exactly how many cards you could make from this kit. There's so many different pieces left over that you can create a ton more. This is just 11 different ones for a little bit of inspiration. I absolutely love trying to create different cards using different kits and stuff like that. It gives you a little bit more creative freedom when all of these pieces are already done and die cut for you. It also is nice to have the inspiration from the sheet that comes with it as well. So I hope this gave you just a tiny little bit of inspiration on some of the things that you can do with the Handmade Holidays Kit from Spellbinders. And once again, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the time that you spend watching what I have to create, or what I've created. I hope you have a fantastic day.